Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody. We're live.
We're live. Welcome to this week's live Q&A. We need some, I don't know, theme song or something.
We should have a theme song, you know? What do you think?
I know. How would it go? Tell us. Sing us a little jingle, why don't ya?
We're here to answer all questions.
It's so good.
Sounded like a rooster crowing right there. That was horrible. That was so bad.
That was amazing. Honestly, it reminded me of preschool nursery rhymes. Welcome, you guys. And on that note,
good to see you, everybody.
Good
Easter.
to see you.
We've done. This is like Easter.
Yeah.
We had family over for Easter, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was so fun. We haven't had a family day for a long time. Everybody's so crazy busy.
Long time.
That was so fun though, especially watching the little kids.
Yes, the little
we tried
kids.
to play Family Feud. That was
always tricky, right?
I figured out that we don't know how to play.
Fun.
We figured it out at the end.
I love that game.
We figured it out.
I remember watching that game on TV when I was really little.
Game.
Really?
Oh, I'm so bad at it.
Quick on your feet.
Yeah, I know. That's the problem.
That's the problem.
I don't know if the problem was that I wasn't on my feet or what the problem was, but I sucked at it. I think you lost every game.
Oh my goodness.
I hate that game now.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to answer some questions. Are you ready for this?
I don't know. I haven't seen the questions.
Okay, well, first question.
I usually preview the questions. I haven't seen the questions, so here we go.
First question for you.
It's coming first to you. I have not seen these questions, so in fairness
really
to
live.
me, if they have these stupid answers, because I didn't look at them ahead of time.
Oh,
I know you sent it to me. I just didn't see it.
No, you're gonna do amazing.
Okay.
Okay, here we are. First question
Here goes
for you.
amazing.
What is a seer? What kinds are there? Is it a prophetic gift?
Yeah, well, okay, so first of all, let's talk about the phrase.
Yeah.
So in the Old Testament, there was twice where the word seer is used for prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And someone like James Gall, who's written the book called The Seer, by the way, I would recommend that book.
Uh-huh.
He probably has the history of why that is, but
yeah.
And it feels to me like they may have had a separation between seer and prophet in the Old Covenant, because some of the prophets, some of the prophetic people in the Old Covenant, where they mostly saw visions, like Ezekiel, right? So I think they just began to call them seers as opposed to like a nabi prophet, nabi meaning word, like a word prophet. And I think at some point in the Old Testament, they made a distinction. Mm-hmm. Now, the word seer isn't used in the New Testament at all, so it's only prophets and prophecy. But I think that in our own training, we often, like Dano and I especially, and Ben, we will often make the distinction just when we're articulating with prophetic people, so that those prophetic people that are primarily, they get the information through kind of like a television, like they see it as a vision, as opposed to a radio, kind of, if that's an analogy.
Yeah.
And I think it helps people to go, oh, I don't feel weird anymore, because like I don't hear like, tell John, he's going to be president. They see it on a screen, and then they kind of, sometimes it's in hieroglyphics even, and they have to interpret it. So I'd say in a 3-minute explanation, I think that's probably the difference.
That's so interesting. I've actually, when I first saw this question, I was thinking like, you know how people talk about like seeing in the spirit realm?
Yeah.
Like, so I was thinking, it's interesting that you would think that's a prophetic gifting, but that makes so much more sense. And kind of the different ways, it almost sounds like the different languages in which the Lord speaks to you, right? Like you might see, but you also might be able to hear. You might hear. There's maybe a prominent way in which you communicate with the Lord.
When I just came back from Lafayette, so this example is really fresh in my mind. Yeah. It's common for Lafayettans to know 3 languages, and many of them know 5. Holy. It's very uncommon for an American to know more than 1 language, right? Mm-hmm. So again, if I can use that as an analogy, there are people who primarily are seers, and maybe that's the only way they actually interact with the spirit realm. Yeah. But there are lots of people that they have multiple different dimensions of languages that the Lord speaks to them. And one of the things we try to do in the School of Prophets in our prophetic trainings is we try to expand people's language by really exposing them to the way other people see and hear and feel and touch and taste. Hebrews 5 says that He is training our senses to know good and evil. We talked about that before. So we try to expand people's language because the Lord He's multilingual,
Right.
So actually, a little plug for my prophetic manual. We wrote a book called Basic Training for the Prophetic Ministry. We use it everywhere. We've updated it 3 or 4 times, but we use it here for everything. And in it, there's an example of, I think, around 16, 20 different ways God speaks to you.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most popular chapters because people are like, oh, God's been, I didn't even.
Right. Like, oh, I didn't even know that was God.
Yeah, like I always knew it, but I never realized it, kind of thing,
Yeah, then it becomes really highlighted.
It does, yeah.
So fun. I love it. Okay, somebody has asked, how do you, this kind of in the same vein, how do you differentiate what you are hearing from God versus what your own thoughts are?
We have this question probably like every third week.
Why? Because I feel like it's so, I just think back to a time when I was really sitting in that spot of like, how do I know? And I feel like I've always heard the Lord, but it became, wait, how do I really know?
Am I sure? Yeah.
How am I sure?
Well, 2 things that come to my mind, and we do this training all the time, but one is you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. So you should, like, if you're actually getting stuff that is definable. For example, in your spirit you hear, you're going to meet a man with a fishing hat and he has a plaid shirt on, and you're like, okay, I write that down, and it's going to happen on Monday, and then it doesn't happen. Well, that is super great learning experience. So you write that down, you're like, okay, that was coming from a spirit realm, but it's coming from my human spirit, because God is infallible. God's spirit is infallible.
Yeah.
So I write that down, and what happens is that I let's say I do that 10 times in a row, where I actually get it wrong 10 times in a row.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm learning, like, that's how I hear, that's the voice of my spirit.
Yeah.
And then maybe the 11th time I get something else and I get it right. I'm like, pretty soon, if I will embrace my mistakes, I start to go, oh, that sounded differently. And after a while, I'm like, okay, I'm listening to that sound. This sound is my human spirit, which is not evil, of course. And that sound is the voice of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, my sheep know my voice, not the lambs, the sheep. So we're learning the voice of the Lord.
That's really good.
And I think that's probably the one that's most important. Secondly, we talked about this, so I don't want to give a bunch of time to it, but the gift of distinguishing of spirits is 1 Corinthians 12. Is also a gift that, well, again, it's called the gift of distinguishing spirits. Like, what spirit is that I'm hearing?
Yeah.
And I think that having that gift makes a huge difference.
So good. So good. This is an interesting question.
Uh-oh.
No, I think that this
whenever you say
relevant.
Interesting, it's like we're in trouble.
No, it's like, oh, this is like, I've had these same thoughts.
Okay. Those kind of questions.
I have interesting thoughts too.
Hopefully someone has a good answer today, because I'd like to solve this problem for me.
I think too, I'm always like curious, like, oh, how will he answer this?
Okay.
I had about 10 prophetic words in the last month about marriage and babies.
Ooh.
What do I do with that? I thought you weren't supposed to prophesy mates or babies.
Oof.
Ooh.
Well, we can't be responsible for what other people do. I mean, we teach what we teach, and people have freedom. Like, this is a very free place. I think that the reason why we don't, when I say, personally, when I think of not prophesying mates, for example, I'm saying I don't think you should prophesy Johnny should marry Mary. Elizabeth should marry Henry. And the reason why I say that is because if that doesn't work out for numerous different reasons, then you marry someone else, 3 years later, and then the first time you get in a fight, you're like, oh, I married the wrong person. I didn't marry the person God wanted me to marry. So that's really hard. And secondly, in the early days of the Jesus movement, which I was a big part of, there was a lot of, like, there was very standard, it was very common, to tell two people that they were going to marry each other. And I had so many friends who had terrible marriages because they didn't marry for love, they married for prophecy. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to repeat that mess.
Yeah.
But, on the other hand, sometimes the Lord's like, hey, tell her that, this next season is a season of love and romance, and that, she's going to find the man of her dreams. I don't have so much problem with that personally. I mean, you want it to be accurate, of course. And then babies, babies is another thing. It's like sometimes people don't get pregnant without a prophetic word about pregnancy. But I just don't love it when,
it's hard.
Sensitive.
It's just sensitive.
Super sensitive, right? And I've ministered to people. I'm like, hey, you're going to have a child, and they had a child, and they miscarried. And I've had that happen over 25, 30, 40 years. I've had it happen 2 or 3 times. That's super tough for people.
Yeah.
It happens. But also, I remember one of my very first prophetic words that was, that was like really direct, was over this gal named Lisa, and her and her husband couldn't have children. They tried 13 years married, couldn't get pregnant. The Lord said, tell Lisa she's going to have a child this time next year. And I told the Lord, I'm not going to do that. And he said, if you don't tell her, she can't get pregnant. So there is, and then obviously I told her, and then she got pregnant and had a child, and it was a beautiful story. But the point I'd make is that in that case, the Lord actually said, I'm going to use this prophetic word to open her womb. And so, I just think that, when you're first starting in prophetic ministry, like your first 3 or 4 years, I just think you should be careful what you do, because you're not in your mind, if you've never failed, you don't have in your mind what that can do.
Yep.
And so you're not, I don't want to say careful, but maybe there's another word, but you're not nurturing in your prophetic ministry, and it can become kind of destructive.
Right, and just being sensitive too to how sensitive those prophecies might be to somebody, and you have no idea what they are feeling towards getting married or having a baby, or whatever the situation
exactly.
might be.
Maybe they don't want children, or maybe they've tried and had many miscarriages, and it's like, oh, that was really painful.
Right.
And I think there's, I don't even know. This is really a good conversation for me, because I'm just thinking through it. The goal of prophecy is encouraging, exhorting, comforting. So, what you're not trying to do is create a ton of pain for people.
Right.
And yet, unknowingly, sometimes you are.
Yeah.
So we have to just, I think that part of it is being aware that you could be doing that. So how you articulate it, what's the protocol, all of that stuff's super important.
So important.
Yeah.
It's really good. Okay, sort of a different vein here.
Okay.
Do you have a routine to prepare your heart for writing? How conscious are you of writing in the glory?
Well, you know the answer to this, because I just did a little seminar for you guys.
Workshop.
So why don't you answer that?
Oh, why I answer?
See if you were listening.
I don't know how conscious you are in your writing process.
Always.
Yeah, from my understanding is, you set aside the time even when you're not inspired to write. But if you are inspired to write, then you sit there and you write until the inspiration is gone.
Yeah, and I'll say this, like, preachers are always on, writers are always on. So I think that nuggets, like, you get nuggets
throughout your day, you jot them down.
Yeah, I'm always writing something in my journal on my phone. Always. I showed you guys, I have 1,600 as of like a week ago. I had 1,670 separate writings, and those might be 5 pages long. And so anytime I hear something, a quote, an experience, I'm immediately writing it down, because those are, and that's like, it's like to a contractor that is wood for framing, that is concrete for laying the foundation, that is roofing for putting on.
Right.
So I like, and you think you're going to remember them forever, especially if you've heard a great something or had a great experience, and you're like, I will never forget that, and then you do.
Right.
So and I review them, like I was on the plane for 13 hours the other day. I probably spent 4 hours just reading my notes back from 2011 all the way, like just reading it, and then go, oh, that's really good, and I copy and paste it into a new note, like, Okay, these are current things I'm working on. Oh, put that in my leadership book. Put that in this, ashes to, give me your ashes book, and I'm like, and then emailing to myself so I have them on paper.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Emailing yourself enough to know. I was listening to Malcolm Gladwell, who's another
he's
author, recently
amazing.
talk about his writing process, and similarly, he said that he will jot down little notes or things to himself, and he'll email them to himself, and he's like, the challenge is going back to that email and trying to read the hieroglyphics of what I thought I was, what I thought I was trying to say, or what was so inspiring about that one sentence. Like it's gone.
Yeah. I've learned that, and I'm not saying I'm smarter than Gladwell, but I was forever like, what did I mean by that?
Oh, totally.
And so I will now just speak it into my phone, and even though sometimes, when you're in a hurry, it doesn't come out exactly right. And you're like, this is what I meant by that. This is why I saw it. And I'll give context to it, because that happens too. And I'm like, what was I thinking when I said that,
So good. Okay. We have time for one more question.
Gosh, this time just goes so fast.
Quick. I know. Maybe one time we should set aside lots more time.
Yeah. 2-hour session.
What would you say to your 20-year-old self? 28-year-old self. That's a difference.
28-year-old self?
28-year-old self. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've answered this question several times. I would say the world wasn't built in a day. Mm-hmm. My mom would say that to me all the time. The world wasn't built in a day. Slow down, smell the roses. Mm. I'm very driven. I am. You married another very driven person. Mm. Sometimes you lose what's really important in life because you're chasing something you're trying to finish. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this, I still struggle with it. Mm-hmm. Important people like your family come over and you're in the middle of a project, and it's like, okay, well, this project can be done next week. Mm. But because I'm so project oriented, it's hard to just put the project down and go in the house and have lunch with everybody, because people are the most important part of life besides God. Mm. And yet, and I really, this about me, I really love people, but I really get so distracted by building something, doing something, conquering something, fixing something. And I think when I was younger, it was way worse. So I think that just prioritizing the things that are really important in life and making sure that people feel connected and loved and cared about, and not being someone who prioritizes the project over people.
That's really good.
And I think those things are the things that I really regret. I really regret those things.
That's really good. I think when you're young, it's really easy to get caught up in what you're doing, right? Yeah. What you're going after, what you're accomplishing, what your dreams are, what your drive is. And remembering, what is this even unto? Who is this serving? Is this serving anyone else besides me? At the end of the day, what's important? That's a really good reminder.
Yeah, it's so crazy that I honestly think that, at least in my personality, I almost hid behind those things. I'll tell you, a quick crazy story. We had an auto parts store in 3 places, and one of them was losing money very badly. The one in Reading was we were just draining us. Lost $300,000 a year. And I remodeled it and closed it 2 months later. What was I thinking?
Remodeling it.
Remodeling something, a business. It's like arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic while it's sinking. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what does that tell you? When I looked at all of that, I was like, Vallotton, what could you learn about you?
That's interesting how you said you're curious if you hid behind that.
I was hiding.
Yeah, it reminds me of in a different way, but the same way, how people often hide behind their work, right? You get so caught up. You can be present at work, but when you step home, you cannot be present. You can't be present to your own life, but you can be present to your projects. it's telling. It's very interesting.
It's a place to hide.
Oh yeah.
It's like when your marriage is bad, so you stay at work and just, it's like you have this amazing thing you're doing at work, and it's like as your marriage gets worse. And it's like, and then your marriage crashes and you lose the house you were working on.
Right.
And it's like, what was I thinking?
Right. Or like your internal world is so scary that you become so busy, right? So you never have to sit with your own self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or a situation's so tough.
Yeah.
That you kind of like, you just ignore it. And then it's like, if I would have put this much time into my marriage instead of working on my house, I could have had my house and my marriage. But as it is,
I have nothing.
I have nothing. So it's like crazy stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just like it's like you learning. Like I'm learning. Sometimes, Vallotton, your drive to get things done is actually a place you hide.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a good reminder for us.
You should pray this time.
Okay, let's do it. Oh, Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for this springtime finally that's sprung. God, I pray that you would just meet each and every person that's watching right now and that will watch later, God, and your comfort and your presence would be with them, God, and the people that feel like they've been running from situations or maybe from their own internal world, or they've been hiding behind that project, God, I pray that you would just come and meet them today, and that you would show them that what is on the other side of confronting these things. Give them vision for what feels scary, God, and help us to do it afraid even when we're scared.
Do it afraid. Yeah.
In Jesus' name, we just bless each and every person watching. Amen. Thank you guys for joining.
God bless. See you next week, guys.